Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with number 10, the second to last video in the series Bobby Fischer's perfect 11 out of 11, when he achieved a perfect score in the 1963-1964 US Championships. Fischer played in 8 US Championships and he won them all, as you can see from this table, the first one at the age of 14 in the 57-58 event. The one that sticks out there is the 63-64 tournament when indeed Fischer won all his games, finishing 3.5 points ahead of Larry Evans, who finished in second place. This is the table from that tournament, Fischer on his own, far ahead of the rest. In last week's video we saw Fischer beat bottom place Donald Byrne. In round 10 he had the white pieces against a Grandmaster, Paul Banco, who finished in third place. I will put the playlist of the earlier videos at the end of this video and also up here. Let me quote you from the magazine Chess Life, the January 1964 edition. In the later stages of the tournament, some of Fischer's opponents did almost as much to guarantee his 11-0 score as Bobby did. The building tension worked to Fischer's advantage. On Monday, December 30th, Fischer won his last game of 1963, defeating Paul Banco with a neat little combination, after Banco had shown some suicidal tendencies in the management of his defense. We're going to look at that game in a minute, but first, let's find out about the eventful life of Paul Banco, Fischer's opponent in this game. Banco was born on July 15, 1928 in Amiens in France, where his Hungarian parents were on vacation. He was raised in Hungary. Banco learned to play chess when he was 8 years old from his father, but did not compete in tournaments until age 17, due to World War II. During the war he dug ditches for the Hungarian army before being captured by the Soviet army, which forced him to be a laborer. He eventually escaped to his home, only to find that his brother and father had been sent to Russia as laborers, and his mother died as the war neared its conclusion. Banco made rapid progress once he began tournament play and became Hungarian champion by age 20. He qualified for the 1952 interzonal tournament but was unable to compete as he was sent to a concentration camp in March 52 for attempting to defect to the American embassy in West Berlin during a chess tournament in East Berlin. He starved and saw others around him die. He remained imprisoned for 16 months, attaining release after Stalin's death. He emigrated to the US in 1958 after defecting following the World Student Team Championship in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1957. The World Chess Federation FIDE awarded him the title of Grandmaster, and he was previously awarded the title of International Master in the year 1950. Banco's highest achievement was qualifying and competing in the candidates tournaments in 1959 and 62. He finished 8th in 59 and 6th in 62. Banco also qualified for the 1970 interzonal tournament, but gave up his spot to Bobby Fischer, who went on to win the World Championship in 1972. Without Banco, Fischer most likely never would have become world champion. Banco defeated 4 world champions in his career: Fischer, Tal, Petrosyan and Smyslov. His career score against Fischer was 3 wins, 8 losses and 7 draws. After Fischer retired, Banco was one of the few players with whom he maintained contact. Reportedly, the two corresponded every week. In later life, Banco was a tutor to the Polgar sisters, Zsuzsa, Zsofia and Judith, and Peter Leko. He was also a highly regarded composer of endgame studies and chess problems. Banco passed away on August 26, 2019 in Budapest at the age of 91. Quite an eventful life indeed. Now let's play some chess. Fischer had his last white game of this championships and Banco was sitting behind the black pieces. We're in New York, it's the 30th of December 1963. And as always, Fischer opened with the e-pawn. G6, D4, Bishop G7, and here Fischer played Knight C3. I'm taking his comments from his amazing book My 60 Memorable Games for this video, and Fischer here writes that with C4 instead of Knight C3, D6 and then Knight C3, we will transpose to the King's Indian. But knight c3 was played, and after d6 we have a peerage defense on the board. f4, the sharpest way to battle the peerage, writes Fischer. This approach is called the Austrian attack. Knight f6, knight f3, Benko castled, and bishop d3 from Fischer. He writes that this is an improvement over the bishop e2 move, which he played against Viktor Korchnoi in the 1962 Candidates Tournament the previous year. So bishop d3 was played in this game, and bishop g4, and Fischer writes this is preparing to sacrifice the minor exchange. What he means is swapping the bishop for the knight on f3. Parting with the bishop pair is a sacrifice in Fischer's eyes. Bobby loved the pair of bishops. He kicked that bishop with h3, and Benko took, sacking the minor exchange. Queen takes, knight c6, bishop e3 developing, and e5 attacking white's impressive pawn center. The alternative is knight d7, attacking now the d4 pawn. With two pieces, it's only defended it once. But then e5, says Fischer, and this move keeps black cramped. So e5 was played, and Fischer decided to take once on e5, d takes, and now push f5. And Fischer writes this is already threatening to obtain a winning bind with the g2, g4, g5 moves. In this position, Benko took on f5. The alternative is knight d4, attacking the queen, and after the queen drops back, g takes f5, e takes f5 with a quick crush inside, writes Fischer. He did not think this was playable for black. So after f5, Benko took on f5 straight away. If you take with the pawn, then there is e4 with good counterplay for black, writes Fischer. So he decided to take with the queen. Knight d4. Benko is willing to sacrifice a pawn to drive the white queen away from its dominating post, explains Fischer, because this pawn is now hanging. The move queen d7 instead is safer, according to Fischer. But knight d4 was played, and now Fischer can indeed take on e5. He did not do that. He said he was tempted to accept it there. But then there is knight g4, and that is a double attack on the queen, so you cannot take the knight. And then Fischer says queen takes g7 check is the move, sacrificing the queen, king takes, and then take on g4. With threats all over the place, says Fischer, but the move knight c6 is hard to crack, and that's why Fischer did not play it. White has two bishops for the queen, and Fischer decided this is not enough. The engine in 2020 says that castling queenside gives white enough compensation, and this is a very exciting position. But as mentioned, Fischer did not go for taking on e5. He dropped the queen back to e2. The queen was attacked there on f5. Knight e8 by Benko with the idea of knight d6 and then breaking with either f5 or c5 and then c4, explains Fischer. Here, white can castle queenside, and Fischer says, I thought the king would be safer on the king side, so he castled kingside instead. The drawback is that the kingside pawns can no longer safely advance. That would expose the king too much. Here Fischer expected that black would play c6, and then he had planned knight e2, after which black must either exchange his only well-placed piece, that knight on d4, or allow white knight to scramble with knight g3, followed by knight h5 or knight f5. But c6 was not played by Benko. He played knight d6, and this is the sharp option, says Fischer. Queen g3, the only way to sustain the initiative. Fischer gives a few variations showing that other moves don't work as well. And here Benko played king h8, and Fischer points out that Benko missed a chance here with f5 instead. He gives this variation, bishop h6, that threatens checkmate on g7, so queen f6, and then we get bishop takes, queen takes check, king takes, e takes f5, knight takes f5, the rooks are centralized, and knight e4 with a comfortable edge for white, but certainly no forced win, says Fischer. A better endgame for white, but would Fischer have won it? We'll never know. So instead of f5, king h8 was played here by Benko. Queen g4, very nice move, preventing the f7, f5 push. c6 from black. Fischer says this is too passive. Black should have played more actively with c5 instead. After c6, he played queen h5, threatening to take on d4, and if you take back, this pawn gets pushed, opening up the bishop diagonal with a checkmate threat on h7. And Fischer explains that either knight e6 or c5 should have been played here, but Benko goes for queen e8 instead, and that is the losing mistake, and we're only on move 17, because now we see that same sequence of moves. Bishop takes d4, e takes d4, and if you play e5, as we saw in that previous variation with that checkmate threat on h7, then black has f5, and that shows the point of bringing the queen to e8. The black queen is now attacking the white queen, and this solves black's problems. It's defending against a checkmate and attacking white's queen. White will have to swap the queens, bringing an end to his attack, and he really has to swap the queens, otherwise his knight on c3 will fall. So what to do after e takes d4, e4, e5 does not work, as we just saw, because of that f7, f5 move. Well, if you haven't seen it before, you're now going to see one of Bobby Fischer's most famous moves of his short but exciting career. He wants to make e4, e5 work, but f7, f5 is a problem. So what does Fischer do? He plays rook f1 to f6, blocking the f-pawn, giving up a full rook. What a move. Fischer writes in his book, the Zwischenzug that Benko had missed. What a wonderful move. If you take the rook, then e4, e5 does work. Checkmate threat on h7 again, and all you can do is give away your pieces, like this, to extend the mate for a few more moves, but it is a forced checkmate. So after rook f6 you cannot take that rook. What about if you take the knight instead? Well, then we see the same thing, e4, e5 with similar variations. Black will be checkmated in a few moves. So in this position, Benko saw that he could not take on f6, he could not take on c3, and he decided to play king g8. And we'll see the point of that move in a second. e5 as planned, threatening checkmate, and now h6, and that is the point of king g8. If white now takes on h6, that is not check, then black has f7, f5 to his disposal again. And the game will go on for a while. After the move from the game h6, Benko had been hoping for rook takes d6, take that piece, because then there is queen takes e5, queen takes, bishop takes, and with two white pieces hanging, black survives to a worse endgame. But Fischer did not take on h6, he did not take the knight on d6, he played the knight simply back to e2, taking it out of the attack of that pawn. And here Benko resigned. There is no good defense against rook takes d6. If you save the knight with knight b5, then there is queen f5 with a checkmate on h7. And if instead you take on f6, then there is queen takes h6 again with that checkmate on h7, which you cannot stop. So after the move knight c3 back to e2, Benko resigned and Fischer had won again. So in 21 moves another Grandmaster is demolished, writes Larry Evans in his introduction to this game in the My 60 Memorable Games book. Fischer was now on 10 wins out of 10 games. In the new year 1964, round 11 was scheduled, and it was his friend, international master Anthony Sadie, who stood in the way of the perfect tournament. And that is what next week's video is about. A quote from Learn from Bobby Fischer's Greatest Games. Fischer didn't have to win this game to secure the United States Championship title, but he was aiming for the perfect 11-0 sweep. He played with full determination and created an absolute masterpiece with one of his most memorable moves, Rook F1 to F6, you saw it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you like the video, if you like this series, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.